Some people call it fate. Others call it destiny. But in the Norse worldview, it's something far more intricate. A living web that connects every being, every choice, and every echo of the past. The threads of our ancestors run through us. The choices we make today ripple forward into generations yet unborn. This isn't just myth. It's a way of understanding how we move through the world. So tonight, we're going to trace those threads together through the stories of the Norns, the roots of Yggdrasil, and the ways our ancestors saw fate not as fixed, but woven. Welcome back to Fireside Frith, a hearth for Norse pagans and the curious alike. I'm Suzannah WanderingStar, a kindred leader and local Githya, here to share stories, wisdom, and real talk about living our path today. Whether you're a longtime heathen or just curious about Norse spirituality, you're in the right place. If you want to dive deeper, visit www.theosatruecommunity.com for resources, classes, and community spaces. Or join the conversation on our public Facebook group by searching for the Osatru Community Inc. Now let's settle in. Maybe light a candle, take a deep breath, and imagine yourself seated around a warm fire beneath the night sky. Today, we're asking one of the oldest and deepest questions in the Norse worldview. Is fate fixed, or do we have the power to shape it? We'll explore this question through the twin concepts of Wyrd and Orlog, the weaving of destiny, the weight of ancestral memory, and the delicate dance between what was, what is, and what may yet be. So some of our previous episodes will kind of act as a primer to this, because we're mostly going to be talking about the web of Wyrd and fate. And that is something that we did touch base on in episode 18 for the Norse soul. And we talk about the web and its relation to Yggdrasil and the 9 realms in episode 22. These concepts shouldn't be brand new to you unless it's your first time listening. And if it is, then that's okay, because we're going to go over some definitions toward the beginning. So here we are at the beginning. Part 1, the weaving of fate, Wyrd and Orlog defined. In Old English, Wyrd, that's W-Y-R-D, is often translated as fate, but that word doesn't quite capture its living essence. Wyrd isn't a single path or a prophecy carved in stone. It's a web. Every choice, action, and ripple of cause and effect weaves into this web. It's dynamic, interconnected, and always changing. Then there's Orlog, or primal law, also original layers. These are the deep roots of your being, the inherited energies, family patterns, and ancestral echoes that shape the foundation of your life. Think of it as the threads that were already on the loom of your life when you were born. The culture you grew up in, the lessons passed down from generations, the karma or the legacy that you carry forward. Together, Wyrd and Orlog form this tapestry of being, one that is never static, always being woven by your own hands and by those around you. And of course, at the loom of all creation sit the Norns, Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld. Their weaving reminds us that time is not linear, but cyclical and interwoven. The past bleeds into the present shapes the future, and all three coexist in every breath we take. Part 2, mythology, the weavers of fate. In Norse mythology, the fabric of existence is literally woven. At the roots of Yggdrasil, the great world tree, sit the Norns, the 3 mysterious beings who weave the fates of the gods and mortals alike. And I already briefly mentioned them, but like I said before, their names are Urd, what was, Verdandi, what is, and Skuld, what shall be. They draw water from the well of Wyrd to nourish the roots of the cosmos, and with each pour, the tree and all its worlds are renewed. Past, present, and future are all interwoven. The Norns aren't goddesses in the usual sense. They are older, elemental forces. They're keepers of balance, recorders of deeds, and weavers of the inevitable. Even Odin, the All-Father himself, cannot escape what they weave. This myth reminds us that fate isn't a decree from on high, but an active, ever-changing process. It's not written, it's woven, and every life adds new threads to the pattern. When it comes to the role of the Norns, obviously we know they are weaving fate for the destinies of gods and humans. When we say that they draw water from the well of Wyrd, they keep the world tree healthy by sprinkling this water onto the roots. And they use clay from the well to patch the tree where the bark has rotted. As they tend to Yggdrasil, they're holding the universe together. They're responsible for preserving all creation. So it is said that the Norns have this sort of absolute power ability. All of their decisions are final and cannot be changed. So do with that information what you like, whether that makes you nihilistic or hopeful. That's up to you to decide. The Norns were also present at births. For both good and bad, the Norns existed to shape someone's life. And I just wanted to mention, because earlier I said they're not like other goddesses. What I mean by that is that they were not worshipped, per se. They were very well respected and feared, but there is no evidence that they were actively worshipped. People would lament their fate, but couldn't petition the Norns to change it. There's no amount of worship or gifts you can give them to coax them into changing your fate. And this kind of reminds me of, if you guys have seen Hercules, the Disney version, when the Fates have Hercules' string and they go to cut it and then they can't cut it. Zeus had put a lightning bolt there, a magical lightning bolt, so they couldn't cut it. That is not something I think the Norse would believe that I'm aware of, based on the histories and the sagas and what we have. Granted, that was also a Disney story, so things are embellished, taken away, added. So, grain of salt, friends, grain of salt. That covers the mythology of fate. Of course, there's so many more examples of fate in the sagas, but that's the three main beings that are connected to it directly, and the in a nutshell story about them. Part 2, History of Wyrd, Orlog, and Ancestral Understanding. So the word weird appears in the Beowulf epic and later Anglo-Saxon writings, sometimes personified and sometimes seen as an impersonal force. The concept predates the Viking Age, stretching deep into early Germanic and Anglo-Saxon belief systems. While Orlog comes from the Old Norse word Orlog, or primal layers, or original law, as stated earlier. This isn't law in the legal sense, but more like the foundational rules of existence. These ideas reflect a worldview where time and fate are circular, not a straight line, but a living cycle of cause and effect. Your Orlog is the foundation you inherit. This is the sum of your ancestors' actions, both their triumphs and their mistakes. Your weird is what you make of it through your choices and deeds. The sagas and the Eddas often echo this balance. I'm going to read a short little snippet from the Poetic Edda. This is from Helga Kvide Hundingsbana. In English, it's the first lay of Helgi Hundingsbane. And I will be reading the English version. According to Myth and Folklore Wiki, this poem begins in a location called Bralund with the birth of Helgi Hundingsbane, the son of Sigmundur and Borghildur. The Norns arrived at the dwelling to shape his future as a hero. Quote, "In olden days, when eagles screamed and holy streams from heaven's crags fell, was Helgi then, the hero-hearted, Borghild's son, and Brolin born." 'Twas night in the dwelling, and Norns there came, who shaped the life of the lofty one. They bode him most famed of fighters all, and best of princes ever to be. End quote. You can see that the Norns came and a warrior's fate was woven before his birth, but his courage in later tales gives fate to that meaning. And we can see here that even the gods, with all their wisdom, live within this weave. Ragnarok itself is foretold in the Voluspa, but how it unfolds is still shaped by every act of courage and defiance that precedes it. The Norse didn't see fate as a resignation. They saw it as participation. Life was the art of weaving well with what you were given. Now, I won't go into the aspect of fate with Ragnarok because I want to do Ragnarok as its own episode. We'll talk about all of that specifically with Ragnarok in the Ragnarok episode. I'm not sure exactly when we'll do that episode, but sit tight. If enough people request a certain subject, I will definitely put it on my tracker. But until then, that's all I will say about Ragnarok. Part 3, the threads we carry. All right, we're going to take a moment here and imagine life as a tapestry stretched out before you. And we're thinking about weaving the threads of a web of weird, you know? Some threads were there when you got there. This is your family, your culture, your inherited stories, the hand you were dealt upon arrival to this planet. Others you've added with your own choices. Things you've learned, whether it be the easy way or the hard way, the people you've loved, the dreams that you've dared to chase, even the troubled times, all of that can help weave into something amazing. Ask yourself, what threads did you inherit? And what new ones have you chosen to weave? If you wanted to, you could jot these down for later. A small act of noticing how your weird continues to grow. In my kindred, we use this as an exercise to discuss, okay, what did we inherit, whether it's good or bad? If you can only think of bad things that you inherited from your family or what have you, try to think of one positive thing. Surely there's one positive thing, even if they're terrible people. I think the thing I mentioned was that my family is very adventurous. From hundreds of years ago, they were explorers, warriors, and that was something that came down through the generations. And that's a positive because I think it's important to try new things and being open like that. Another thing would be musical or artistic. Everybody in my family is artistic in some way. And then what new threads have I chosen to weave? Well, I've chosen to make my art a business, hence this room, which is riskier than other stable careers. And it comes with its own challenges. But also, I'm Norse pagan, and I come from a Christian family. Sure, we weren't always Christian. That is part of my own weave, my own thread that I've added into this picture of life. So if you wanted to take time to use my examples to help think of your own and journal about it, I mean, that's a great way to reflect on these. And in a way, you can utilize that to venerate your ancestors, which will be a sneak peek what our next episode's about. When it comes to threads you inherit, there's also negative things that you can journal about. I don't want to speak negatively about my family or anything, because they're awesome. They're all hard workers. And that is a double-edged sword. Very hard workers. Never taking a break can really take a toll on you. And that can be another thing that I can journal about and think about and really try my hardest to give myself time to take a break instead of working all the time. That's something I've been working on the past couple of years. I've finally given myself a day off over the past couple weeks, and it's been working out great so far. So I'm at the very beginning of breaking that cycle, but you know, that's just an example. There's so many examples out there. Let me know in the comments if you feel comfortable. What threads did you inherit and which ones are you choosing to weave? Because it's always cool to see your responses. I know this is just briefly touching the subject of fate, but the question of the day was, is fate fixed or is it fluid? That is the heart of today's conversation. Many in the old stories, heroes, gods, kings, they met their fate despite their efforts to avoid it. But in some sagas, we see people shape destiny through courage, sacrifice, and wisdom. In this way, Wyrd is both. It is a framework and a living story. And you can't always control what's already been woven, but you can influence what comes next. Modern psychology even echoes this truth with generational trauma, inherited behaviors, family expectations. All of these form our Orlog, but healing, reflection, and intentional living becomes acts of reweaving. When we heal ourselves, we tug gently on the web, rippling that change through time, both backward and forward. Another thing I would like to mention with talking about this, I think the example we used in my kindred's discussion was alcoholism, because it's something that most of us in the group are familiar with, whether we experienced it or it doesn't matter the capacity. We all know somebody who's been affected by alcoholism. So that was the example that we used. So I'll use that example right now. Say you're an alcoholic and you don't want to be an alcoholic anymore and you want to change your fate. It would make sense to surround yourself with people who not only want that fate for you, but also are putting in that work, like accountability. That's why AA is a thing. And there are non-Christian AA type things out there, but you're going to keep running into the same problems if you don't make some changes, and it takes a certain amount of discipline. But if you want to change your fate, if you want to get to a better place, you have to put in the work. And of course, alcoholism is an extreme, and I'm not telling anybody how to live their life, but let's take something that's less extreme. So me as an artist, wanting to make my art a business. I had a lot of things I followed on social media that were just brain rot, and just a bunch of things that didn't help me. And I would just waste time on the internet, just scrolling through nonsense. So I started curating my algorithms to be aimed at things that will inspire me or help me get there. So we're talking like entrepreneurship blogs or creators, other people who have turned their passion into business. I don't just pay attention to other artists or other clothing designers. Seeing someone passionate about their thing makes me passionate about my thing, because I'm excited for them and it lights a fire up under me. If I want to change my Wyrd to bring that into existence, I have to surround myself with other things that are going to inspire me, help me, or get me there. And I know that sounds selfish, like what do I do for entertainment? Well, I have Netflix for that. And does that mean I don't have any friends who aren't helping me or who aren't inspiring me? No, I definitely have friends that are just people that I care about because I care about them, because I love them, because they're my friends. But sometimes we have those toxic friends that just tear us down. And sometimes you gotta put some distance there and maybe not be friends with them, but get some space and make sure you have that space so that you can work on yourself for whatever it is. Even if it's something like fitness, but you have a friend who every time they want to hang out, they want to go out for beers and burgers. And they want to do that like 2-3 times a week. But hey, you want to work on your gains. You want to be more muscular. And you're like, man, I can't be eating this junk food and copious amounts of beers 3 times a week. You're like, okay, well, maybe do it once a week or once a month or whatever works for you. Everybody's path is going to be different. Everybody's Wyrd is going to be different. And the thing about it is that our Wyrd is intertwined with other people's Wyrds, because like every person has a string and we all connect in a way. So those are just a couple examples. There's so many different ways to look at it. Let me know if you have any questions. We can go over things in depth. I'm going back and forth between the script I wrote and the slideshow I made for my kindred. Well, I'll just tell you what our deep dive questions are since I'm looking at the slides right now. First one is, do you believe fate is fixed or fluid? And I think most people said it's kind of both. Fate itself is fixed, but how you get there is more fluid. And then the next question was, have you seen generational trauma or inherited behaviors shape someone's life? Pretty sure everyone was like, yeah, absolutely. And then once you learn about it and you can adjust how you do things and maybe not succumb to that generational trauma, but rise above it, then things will get better. The third question was, if Orlog is the starting point, how much power do we have to weave new weird? I can't remember what people answered for that, but let me know your answers in the comments. For me, I think we have a lot of power in weaving a new weird. Not necessarily a new weird, but changing it, changing the weave, changing the patterns. I think we have a lot of power in that. We might still end up in the same place, but the outcome might be different because things can look good or bad depending on perspective. So just because fate is this destination doesn't mean that everything between now and then isn't going to be awesome. We can make it awesome by the decisions that we make. And if you want something, you got to either save your time, save your money, save your energy, do whatever it is you got to do to get there. And then get there. Just put in the work and do it. It takes a little bit of self-discipline, a little bit of determination, some blood, sweat, and tears. You'll get there. You can change your weird. This is the last question of the deep dive discussion from my slides is, does this remind you of karma, ancestral memory, or other spiritual systems? And I think the general consensus was like, yes, but karma's different. By the Oxford Dictionary, karma in Hinduism and Buddhism is the sum of a person's actions in this and previous states of existence, viewed as deciding their fate in future existences. So that is you yourself in your reincarnations, essentially. Whereas Orlog is ancestral. It has to do with you, whether you're reincarnated or not, if you believe in that or not. Is it like karma? Sure, but it's different. All right, I know I've kind of just hinted at some things that have to do with the modern application, but we're going to move on to part 4, modern application. So we're going to talk about weaving with awareness. How do we live with Wyrd and Orlog in mind today? Well, start small. Notice your patterns. Do the exercise from earlier where you think of what were your inherited threads and what were the new ones that you chose to weave. Doing that exercise can help you reflect on your family's stories, the ones told with pride and then the ones that might have been whispered quietly. When you catch yourself repeating something that doesn't serve you or align with your values, ask yourself, is this thread something I want to keep in my life? If it's something you do want to keep doing it. Make a conscious effort if it's something that really works with you and go for it. Figure out ways to do it more intentionally and be aware that you're doing it. But if you don't want to keep that thread, if it doesn't align with who you want to be, you can work with Wyrd and Orlog. I'm going to talk about 4 different options of methods. And that's not to say that there isn't more options out there. These are just the 4 that I'm going to talk about because I have experience in them. Therapy or shadow work. That's mostly for me is like healing those inherited wounds, generational trauma, stuff like that. And if you don't know what shadow work is, don't worry, we're going to get to that. The next one, ritual and storytelling, giving voice to ancestors and the threads they left behind. The cool thing about ritual and storytelling is that's a way we keep the positive things alive. The next one, art and creation. Weaving new patterns into your life, making art out of it. Construction, woodworking, wood burning, blacksmithing. It could also be poetry, designing sets for theater or movies. Could be making movies. There's so many different forms of art. It just depends on what you want to do and what you like. So art and creation is the literal act of weaving new patterns into your life. And if you're new here, check out episode 19, Crafting as a Sacred Practice. I talk about how art can be sacred. It doesn't always have to be. It could also just be art for art's sake. And that's cool too. Using art and creation to manifest that world you want, that person you want to be, that is also a way you can work with Wyrd and Orlog. All right. Number 4, we have ancestor veneration, honoring those who came before you while choosing which lessons to carry forward. You can venerate the good parts of your ancestors, even if they weren't the best people, and you can carry those positive things and those good lessons into the future. As far as the bad stuff, it is good to acknowledge it. You don't want to just pretend it didn't happen, because that's not helpful. History will repeat itself if we forget about it. Be aware of it, but don't honor that part of them if you don't want to. Ultimately, the loom is in your hands. You are both the weaver and the woven. This last section, we're going to go over shadow work through a Norse lens. As we've been talking about Wyrd and fate, what's fixed and what's chosen, it's worth looking inward too, because sometimes the patterns we think are fate are actually our own shadows at work. Part 5, shadow work through a Norse lens. First things first, I want to get a few things straight. Shadow work is a modern term coming from Jungian psychology, the shadow being the parts of ourselves that we may repress, deny, or fear. It's not originally a heathen or a pagan or a witchcraft concept, but it fits well when we think about the inner struggles we see in the myths and in our daily lives. In my kindred, we did a whole discussion group on shadow work through a heathen context. I'm going to read you a little bit from the slides. We can look at Loki, for example. He exposes what the gods want to keep hidden. Hypocrisy, pride, their mistakes. He is chaos, yes. He's also a reflection. Maybe Loki isn't just an external force, but maybe he's the uncontrollable truth that we all try to avoid. Then there's Odin. He's the god who seeks wisdom, no matter the cost. He's lost an eye he hung from the tree, deceiving and sacrificing for knowledge. His hunger for power and understanding is admirable, but it also shows us what obsession looks like when it goes unchecked. Odin reminds us that even the pursuit of wisdom has a darker side. Or you can think of Sigurd and Fafnir, the hero and the dragon. Fafnir's greed and possessiveness literally turn him into something monstrous. When Sigurd slays the dragon, it's not just about heroism. It's about confronting the hoarding, fearful part of ourself that doesn't want to let go. The sagas are full of these lessons. Most heroes don't fall because fate turns against them. They fall because of pride, envy, or anger. In that sense, shadow work isn't necessarily foreign to the Norse mindset. It's just that the language is different. The Norse saw the self as a collection of parts. If you remember my episode on the Norse soul, we have things like the Philia, the Haminga, Hugur, and more. Your luck, your spirit companion, and your will, they're all reflections of your inner state. If your Philia was troubled or took on a strange form, that could be a sign that something within you is out of balance. The outer and the inner were never separate. When we bring shadow work into a heathen context, it isn't about banishing darkness or purifying yourselves. It's about understanding how our inner landscape shapes our weird. How unacknowledged parts of us can ripple outward into our choices, our relationships, and our community. Now, I'm going to pause right here from my script and go to my discussion slides. A little bit about the historical background of this concept of shadow work. The pre-Christian Norse view didn't frame inner life in terms of light and shadow. Like I said, we have the Norse soul complex that I've outlined in episode 18. And I just wanted to mention this too, that heroes in the sagas were not judged by purity. They were judged by their deeds, reputation, and honor. Failings were often just the tragic flaws. So like I said before, shadow work is a modern term. It was adopted by modern witchcraft, Wicca, eclectic paganism as practices for journaling, meditation, and ritual confrontation of fears. And some people, when they first start getting into paganism or witchcraft, they think that shadow work is closer to the left-hand path or embracing demons or something like that. All right, I'm going to say something that might be controversial. If you want to argue with me in the comments, like, let's have a conversation. I'm down. But to me, that feels like a very Christian concept. And that is just my opinion, guys. Because you don't really see that divine good and evil in our religion. Whether you believe that there is a divine good and evil or not, I think there's a lot more gray area than just black and white. But like I said, that's just my belief. To think that shadow work is only working with demons and the dark side, that just seems very Dungeons and Dragons, evil Disney villain type thing. That makes for a good plot in a movie. But it's also just a very Christian thing. What are demons in that faith? It's fallen angels, right? I mean, there are other cultures that think demons are not fallen angels, that there's something else. But this is just my personal opinion. I just feel like thinking shadow work is working with demons is not real. I mean, if you are working with demons, I think that's something else. I'm not saying that it is impossible. It's very witchcrafty, but not pagan. If there was a Venn diagram, like, paganism and witchcraft go hand in hand most of the time, but there's like a little bit of things that are on the outside. You know what I mean? I'll make a Venn diagram and I'll put it in the Instagram post. At this point, I'm just rambling. So I have a few pictures that I will add to the Instagram post. One is the young model of the psyche, and it has the self in the center, and it has like ego, shadow, persona, anima, unconscious, conscious, and then collective conscious. It looks very similar to the Norse soul complex pictures. I'll post those in there too, that we can compare together, and you can see how similar it is. It's interestingly shaped. It's almost like it's all one object, but there's like two circles stacked on top of each other, and then there's like all these infinities inside of it. Moving right along. Maybe the patterns we think are fate are actually the ones we've never questioned. The things we've inherited or repeated without awareness. That's where the shadow work meets Orlog, taking responsibility for what we pass forward. For us as modern heathens, this kind of work can look like journaling or quiet reflection, asking questions like, what qualities in others trigger me most? Which figure from the lore mirrors the parts of myself I struggle with? What pattern have I inherited that I have the power to change? Or this one is one of my favorites. Have I ever faced a trait in myself that I don't want to admit, like anger, envy, or pride? And how do I deal with these feelings? Do I repress them? Do I express them? Or do I try and transform them? Some people do this through ritual too, symbolically burning a dragon they've written down on paper, or speaking out loud to a mirror and naming what they've denied. Even dream work or asking your philia to reveal something that you're not seeing can be powerful. I really love the dragon thing because I had to fold a bunch of laundry recently, and my husband texted me. He was like, hey, how's your day going? I was like, oh, it's good. I'm just slaying a dragon. I know the laundry is just like an NPC quest. To me, my little ADHD brain, that was a massive quest. Because without my socks, I cannot quest more. So I have to trick myself into doing these things by telling myself it's a freaking quest instead of just doing it. Not that that's really shadow work, but that's the example of using the dragon metaphor to symbolize doing something that is harder to conceptualize. For some reason, deep concepts, I got this. Doing the laundry? No, absolutely not. That is my dragon. Anyway, the key is not to destroy what you find, but to integrate it. To own the wolf before it bites someone else. To recognize that our darkness holds lessons and that facing it is how we walk more consciously with our weird. Shadow work through a heathen lens isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. It's the balance of light and dark, God and giant, wisdom and chaos. All of it is part of the self. When we stop fearing the shadow and start learning from it, we begin to live with intention, not in spite of our flaws, but in awareness of them. When we use shadow work, we can use it to identify those patterns inherited through Orlog, ancestral baggage, trauma, repeated choices. We can balance our personal virtues with honest admissions of failings. We can strengthen the community by owning flaws rather than projecting them onto others or outsiders. Shadow work isn't about eliminating the darkness, but integrating it so it doesn't rule us unconsciously. Remember, shadow work isn't natively Norse, but Norse myth offers epic models of shadow dynamics. Heroes facing or failing to face their flaws, gods confronted by chaotic kinfolk, or dragons embodying greed. Shadow work for heathens means owning both the wolf and the god within, not to destroy the shadow, but live with it consciously. As we wrap up, remember, fate isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we live with, weave with, and sometimes we wrestle with. Shadow work reminds us that even the threads we wish to cut, the old habits, the inherited pain, the uncomfortable truth, all have a place in the larger tapestry of who we are. When we face those threads consciously, we start weaving with purpose instead of fear. The Norns may spin the strands, but how we carry them, how we choose to live, heal, and grow, that's where our power lies. And maybe that's what Wyrd really is. Not fixed fate, but a living web of choice, consciousness, and courage. As we close this episode, remember, Wyrd isn't about surrendering to fate. It's about participating with it. Every action, intention, and heartbeat adds a new thread to your story. If this episode spoke to you, I'd love to hear your reflections. You can send me an email at podcast@theozatruecommunity.com. Share this episode with a friend or join us online at theozatruecommunity.com to connect with others walking the same winding path. Next time on Fireside Frith, we'll explore ancestor veneration, the living bond between the past and the present. We'll talk about how the Norse honored their ancestors, how you can build those connections in your own practice, and why the act of remembrance keeps our stories and our spirits alive. Until then, may your threads be strong, your heart steady, and your weird well woven. Toodaloo.